Hey everybody, welcome back. Jumping right in, I want to get into the sexualization and every other misconception that gets thrown the way of goths that is very damaging. And it's not just damaging in the sense of reputation, but it has to do with the situations we're put in, how we're treated, and how ultimately that affects us not just on an emotional or psychological level, but in some cases physically. So the reason that I was prompted to make this video again, and I know a lot of you are probably like, oh my God, you're covering this subject again. If you're inside the subculture, you probably understand why, but might be sick of hearing of it. But here's the thing. Given this succession of events that took place during the course of maybe a 3-4 day period, I had had enough. And I decided that this is definitely something that bears repeating. This is not a problem that's going away. And I don't know if this is something that's getting worse or if I'm just seeing different layers of it that are exposing different aspects of it to me. And either way, we need to, and it's not just me, all of us really need to kind of do our dead little best to make sure that we quell these types of misconceptions and set records straight, because it's never going to go away. And the more we shut up about it, we can't just throw it out in the ether and just hope it kind of gets where it needs to go, because there is so much more of the misconception versus reality and truth that one of our truths are going to get buried within a matter of a day. So speak up, speak your mind, speak your truth. It is so important, and I would love to hear your comments, as well as I want to hear your experiences, advice, anything you have to give in the comments. So jumping in. So I think one thing that's really important that I preface this with is that this is not a gender specific issue. Men and women are both responsible, but they dole it out in very different ways. It's just that the more aggressive and more potentially dangerous of the two come from men, which is why we tend to focus on, the male aspect of it. In the end, it's really the same consequences and it comes from kind of the same place. It comes from ignorance, either willful or just plain ignorance. It comes from entitlement, fetishization. It comes from sexualization. It comes from extreme apathy, like no regard for other people's feelings. And in a lot of cases, just extreme selfishness. So if you're a person who is listening to all of those things and you become offended by that, saying, just because I want to a goth girl doesn't mean that I am any of those things, hear me out. So I want to outline the differences between both men and women and how the abuse varies between the two. It's not something that I've only been the recipient of, because I've been the recipient of this for many, many years. However, I've also witnessed it happening to others around me. And I've also heard your accounts from people within the community that's shared their experiences with me. So none of this is anecdotal. This is all by way of experience. So we're going to start with the women. All for the sake of accuracy and authenticity, I want to make sure, because I have my notes here, that I'm touching on everything that I think is important. So as far as the women are concerned, they're bullies. They are bullies. They will criticize you right down to your cuticles. The amount of women and men, but women, that have told me to go and harm myself, or let's put it this way. If I had $1 for every time one of them had said those things to me, I would have enough for a down payment on a fixer-upper somewhere in West Virginia. So the women tend to hold the same mindset as men with attacking our mental health, but they also kind of hold to the same concept that they firmly believe that our outward appearance, the way we dress, the way we carry ourselves, even our subculture, is nothing more than a sexual display. And they will use really bad BDSM references when taunting us to like harm or, ourselves. And the funny thing is, like, they'll call us freaks in clown makeup, but what is the very first thing these women do when they're trying to spice things up and seduce their partner? They dress like us. I think people should be supporting each other anyway, but particularly I really truly believe that women need to be looking out for each other. But buying into a stereotype and perpetuating it, something that's so damaging to your fellow female, going that extra mile by cosplaying us minutes after you had told us to go and bleed, when you want to surprise your significant other just to act out your favorite scene to 50 Shades of Grey, which, by the way, is a terrible depiction of a BDSM dynamic, which is meant to exist on respect, communication, care, nurturing, most of all, consent. I know the goths in the room all see the issue, and I'm hoping that you eventually will too. Now on to the men. And I can see all of the justifications in the comments coming in. Yes, we know it's not all men, but the ones that do, oh my God, do they really go that extra mile to really make an impression? Firstly, one thing that is a major issue is they have a really difficult time distinguishing the difference of what they see online versus like the reality. In a lot of cases, they don't really want to. Some are open, some are willing. Because they genuinely don't know. But there's others that refuse to part with that idea. I mean, how many of us have tried to set them straight, and where does that get you? It gets you attacked. They do not like it when you do not live up to their perceived expectations, and they really don't like rejection. And the dynamic kind of all boils down to that famous quote. What is it? Men are afraid that women are going to reject them, and women are afraid that men are going to kill them. And it's kind of dramatic, but it really does, it highlights the dynamic, and it highlights a lot of what we both feel. Nobody wants to be rejected. Men don't want to be rejected, and that's a valid fear. But you have to understand that, our fears are valid too. And that's why it's really important that, such a touchy subject when you have a bunch of men that look toward a group of women, a specific type of women that they believe are into certain behaviors that are damaging. They're behaviors that say BDSM, when you don't understand it and you want to come in and essentially you don't know this person, you know nothing about the dynamic, you know nothing about consent, and you are just kind of jumping in their face, believing that they're this object here for your enjoyment and wanting to essentially physically harm them. You have to understand how that's going to be perceived. Not well. I'm kind of going off on one. I think I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So they truly believe that as goth girls, we are naturally, by default, love pain and submission, are uninhibited, we don't say no, and you can essentially do anything to us. Almost as if we're not human. I mean, I don't know if they got it all from the crappy leather videos with bad fake doms with, one of the main props being some weird riding crop from like Party City or something. But either way, it is not the true depiction. And if that's truly what you're interested in, ask. There are so many people in the community that would be willing to help you because they don't want anybody out there that's going to potentially hurt someone or cause any kind of damage, because not only are they concerned about the recipient, but they're also concerned about how that portrays that group. And it's really important to distinguish that the kink community and the goth community are very much separate, although, and I will admit this, because when I was younger, getting first involved in the goth scene and kind of coming up, there was a lot of overlap between the fetish community and the goth community, because a lot of our events, they coincided. And you can't deny there is a fashion crossover as well. So in the beginning with that overlap, there was a lot of confusion to me, because when I was younger, and there were a lot of these crossover events, but these events were obviously, they were very heavily vetted, and being heavily vetted, you had to be a certain age to get in, and there were rules, etc. And a lot of times with me and my group, we wanted to hear the music, and then there was obviously all that other stuff going on that we weren't very interested in. And it was then that I got introduced to a term that an old friend had, and it was a term called sex nerd. And his definition for sex nerd, he came up with it entirely on his own. He said a sex nerd is a person who is very much like interested in kink, doesn't understand it, and if it weren't for goth clubs, they wouldn't get any. And I remember I was approached on a few occasions by some of these people. And these are people who kind of snuck in or kind of infiltrated, and it's uncomfortable because you get people, you get them all the time. You get like these tourists, you get these guys that get to be in their bonnet about kind of getting with a goth girl, and they'll show up and they'll go to a goth night, and we've been approached. And I don't know if their method of approach is the same with all girls, kind of aggressive like that, but this applies to any sort of kind of niched group, because I'm sure black girls have seen it, Asian girls have seen it, Latino girls, amputees, people who are disabled, anybody who is in a specific niche group, there's somebody that's going to fetishize you. And when that happens, you know the approach. The approach is very different, and the approach is fueled by lust, and it's often very aggressive because they're not seeing you as a person. They're kind of viewing you as a sexual object, and it's very difficult for them to differentiate, and it's hard for them to treat you like a friggin' person. So whether you're a goth or whether you are a person of color, whether you're Asian or trans, what have you, you have undoubtedly been approached in this way. It's not okay. It happens, but it's not okay. And the best thing that we could possibly do is to advocate for ourselves, keep putting content like this out, and hopefully you guys see it. Because if you're kind of tuning in for the first time and you're not a goth, it's important that I think you really listen and pay attention, because if these are kind of the thoughts that you've always had, I think it's important that you hear that not everything you hear is true. Not everything on the internet, you shock horror, not everything you read on the internet is true. And this is just one of those things that is almost becoming like urban legend, and it's not okay, because the amount of people out there, people in my own family included, who automatically believe that I'm into so many of these things, that I have like a vampire fetish, that I want to be a vampire. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. So I want to continue on with more of these examples. So the way that the men tend to come at you is, again, they come for your mental health. Always come for your mental health, which I find ironic, because goths in general, we're just so damn open when it comes to the way that we feel, that we are often perceived as people that struggle with mental illness. But it's the ones that are quiet that you really have to worry about, because if we are wearing this stuff on our sleeves, worry about the person who isn't, because what are they hiding? We also have them kind of not only accusing you of, but kind of hoping for daddy issues. That's another big stereotype. Always got daddy issues. And more creatively, and I have been approached, I have been accused of being a fake goth. And it's kind of aggressively exclaimed too, like as a way to shame me, and also as a way for, it seems like it's done in a way to almost make me want to prove myself as a real goth, like that's going to work. But they will exclaim fake goth. And I'm wondering if any of you had this. So they shame you by telling you that you are this fake goth, when they come and approach you and you ultimately, inevitably reject the advances. Because a real goth, they don't say no, according to them. It always comes back to, if it ain't true, then why are goths a category on Pornhub? So we didn't put ourselves up there. People like you did. You did it without our consent, and unfortunately, to our dismay, there we are. You want to invoke Rule 34. If you don't know what that is, Google it. But if you want to invoke Rule 34 just because it's something that you like, you take all of it or you take none of it. You can't cherry pick. Because if you want to invoke Rule 34, I don't see you going after toothless grannies. I don't see you going after school teachers. You like bears? They're a big category. Clowns, people who sit on cakes, are all categories. Are you going after goths? So something that I really want to point out is that, and this is something that really freaked me out, This is not something that's age specific, because I was gaming about 2 nights ago, and while I was gaming, there's like a very group of ages in, in the group, and then, obviously there's the chat that goes, and among the group you have like 10 to 14 year olds, 10 to 14 year olds, which are fine to game with. And then here comes the chat. Mind you, I have the word goth in my name. Every last one of them either accused me of having scars on my arms, told me to go and harm myself, or... And then there were 2 of them that were getting very sexual and saying things like, I know things that are going to make her the opposite of dry. How about some candle wax and leashes? Ha, I bet you like that. These are kids. These are 10 to 14 year olds saying these things. They were way too comfortable and confident kind of outlining these scenarios and saying these things, whether it be aggressively violent, telling someone to harm themselves, or getting not just sexual in nature, but the types of things, the types of situations that they were outlining. Where are they getting this information? Where are they getting this content? They're getting it from the same exact place as these other people who are older than they are, running around with the same preconceived notions of goths. Not okay. It was disturbing. It freaked me out. And it freaked me out for a number of reasons, because you don't want to hear those things coming out of the mouth of somebody that's a kid. It makes you worry about what they're going to grow into as an adult, because if this is their jumping off point, they are going to get far more extreme in their behavior. And I also worry about any female that they come into contact with at this young age. When I was a kid, when I was their age, I remember watching one of my favorite shows, The Wonder Years, and getting those like goosebumps butterflies when Kevin Arnold kissed Gwendolyn Cooper, and it was like the most wholesome, family friendly, like that is what my brain, that is as far as things went for me as a child, and that's what it should have been. And this is what I'm dealing with now, and that's what kind of spawned this kind of thing and this line of thinking. I'm not even going to attempt to kind of pick apart their mindset and figure out why they think this kind of thing is okay, but to kind of land in our inbox years later after being the bully of goths and suddenly desiring them, it's like, do you think that a jock being interested sexually in a goth is something new? Not the case at all, because for many, many years, and it's always been this way, I'm sure everybody has had this story, goth girls had been the secret desire of some jock somewhere at some point, whereas they would bully them to their face. And ever since the whole big titty goth girlfriend meme and 50 Shades of Grey and SoundCloud rappers and all that stuff, suddenly it's okay. They're able to outwardly express that, but they're the same kind of person as they'd always been, so they're going to do it in a way that's still degrading. So no, this is not growth. You just change lanes. So for those of you who are new, or for those of you who are outside the subculture and you're looking at the attire of goths, and then you're also looking at, like, I guess what people who are heavily involved in, say, BDSM would wear, it could probably be very confusing because the aesthetics, there's always been a crossover there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we partake in those kinds of behaviors. It doesn't mean we don't, but what it means is just because we're goth doesn't necessarily mean that we do. It's not something that's indicative to goth. I mean, there are people that you probably work with, there are people that you probably go to school with, your own family members. It's usually the people you least expect that are into that kind of thing, and that's what cracks me up. But despite that, the fact that we happen to be a category on Cornhub, which, like it or not, we're there. That doesn't necessarily mean just because it's out there, we don't owe you anything. You know, you're not entitled to that information, whether or not we are. It's none of your business. You're not entitled to our personal information just because we happen to fit the sort of stereotype of something that you're into. Just because we happen to be a category on Cornhub among other like bazillion things doesn't mean that we owe you anything. It doesn't mean that we are this way. There are some goths that are this way, but just because we're goth doesn't mean that we are. So it's important that you make that distinction. And if it is something that does really truly interest you, genuinely look into it. Don't just dabble. Don't just go to like Party City and get yourself a cat and nine tails and call yourself, a dom and start landing in goth girls' inboxes expecting to cause them physical harm, because that's not going to end well. I just don't understand the mentality behind that. It's like the audacity is just mind-boggling. But the point of this whole thing is to hopefully educate other people and kind of let you know that that kind of behavior is not okay, that these misconceptions really have to stop. They're truly damaging in so many different ways. So all of that being said, I hope that this has in some way been helpful, not just to the goth community, kind of raising awareness about this kind of thing and just really trying to encourage you to speak up, speak your truth, educate others, and don't be afraid. If, at the very least, it spares one human from doing that to another person, then that's a win. But, no harm, no foul if you try and you get nowhere. But you can't not. It's important that we do, because it does cause more harm if we keep our mouth shut than if we don't. So I think it's really important that we advocate for ourselves, advocate for each other. Women, come on. We got to look out for each other. It's a subject that really gets to me, but really educate yourself if it's something that you're truly into. If the whole, lifestyle is something that you're into, please learn to distinguish the difference between goth and kink. They are entirely different things. They're not connected with one another. There are actual kids involved in the goth scene. So to kind of tar us all with such a broad brush, you're being creepy. Just know that. It's creepy. So bear all that in mind and be a decent human being. And I hope to see you next time. I hope this video made sense. And till next time. Bye.